One of the more interesting things that Blizzard announced and revealed with the showing of the War Within Alpha being now live are, of course, some of the juicy things about the balancing of the specs and the classes for the War Within. But we're not talking about the sea of numbers that are going to be changed, right? We're not talking about looking into things like orbital strike damage being reduced by 25%, or perhaps something like all ability damage of a balanced druid being increased by 8%, and what about restoration druids rejuvenation healing being increased by 30%? All of these things, they are numbers tuning in the alpha 5+ months before the expansion is actually being released. All of these things are bound to be changed multiple times before the expansion actually goes off. What we are more interested in is the philosophy of Blizzard, the plans they have for each of the specs and classes, what they have in mind for the vision of the spec for the next expansion. What is cool is that Blizzard has started to, reveal what are their plans for some of the specs for the next expansion. We have gotten so far 6 different classes having the thoughts of their developers being put on paper, figuratively, for the War Within. For Druid, for example, we are getting several changes to the class 3 of the Druid. Some of the points Blizzard is making is that they are redistributing talents so that all specializations have some talents in their sections that other specializations will value. And while there is a cost to access the physical and magical sections at the bottom of the tree, there are strong, broadly useful talents in them. That was the point where, when you look at the Druid tree, this side is the magical side, this side is the physical side, and very often it was hard to try to reach the physical side, for example, without missing out on some important magical parts of your toolkit, especially for balance and for restoration druid. Blizzard is trying to soften the cost of reaching the physical side of the tree without missing out on too much, and vice versa. Another thing that is very important that hits all of the druid specs is the reduction of the power of your cooldowns. Pretty much all of your cooldowns are being reduced. 5-second reduction for Celestial Alignment and Berserk, as well as a 10-second duration reduction for Incarnation. The point of Blizzard is that these are big cooldowns where we have to spend a lot of power for your spec to make those cooldowns as strong. So their logic is, if we have 100 points of power to give to your spec, if we have to put 30 of these points in a single cooldown, it's going to make it harder for us to spread the remaining points in the rest of your kit and make those other things desirable and feel good to use if we have to spend so many points on a single cooldown. So they are attempting to make the big cooldowns of the Druid class as a whole less impactful so that they can have better choices around the rest of the tree. For the specific changes for each of the specs, you have Balanced Druid. One of the major changes is that Primordial Arcanic Pulsar is being removed. The point is the frustration around the rotation due to this effect being extremely constraining, reducing the value of any of the effects that don't align with its 45-ish second cooldown. And also the progress is based on resources spent, with encounters having intermissions or mechanics where players cannot control but basically misuse this automatic 45-second cooldown proc. They think the annoyance around this effect is similar to the Rune of Power of Mage, so they are giving them the same ending that Rune of Power got for Mage, which is 6 feet underground. Blizzard is also planning to reduce the Astral Power generation for Balanced Druid. They want to slow the pace of the rotation, they want to make pooling gameplay more interesting and provide some space for the hero talents and other bonuses to provide Astral Power. So of course, if you're already generating too much Astral Power from your talents, if you add more Astral Power from your hero talent, it gets just way too much. So they are reducing the general Astral Power generation as well for balance. The same treatment also is being given to Feral for more or less the same reasons. Feral in general already has more energy than it can spend and became essentially limited by global cooldown, not even by the energy. So they are reducing the energy generation of a feral to have you play more tactically, to have you think about the buttons you press rather than having to be essentially just locked by the global cooldown and not really have to think about your energy as a feral druid. They also want to make feral's rotation more clear. You know, should you shred or swipe onto targets in Berserk? Is Primal Wrath or Ferocious Bite with Rampant Ferocity more damage in AoE? These are not really questions that happen very often in other specs. A Ret Paladin in single target is gonna use Templar's Verdict, a Ret Paladin in AoE is gonna use Divine Storm. It's not that complicated. They want to try to give it a similar treatment for Feral. They want to make it more obvious what you're supposed to be doing in each of the different, damage profiles you might be encountering. Single target, 3 targets, massive AoE, to make it simpler of a rotation for Feral Druid. For Resto Druid, the main concern of Blizzard is to reduce the active keybinds, as well as increasing the base power of rejuvenation, as well as more Heart of the Wild, shape-shifting ability for the spec. They think that Resto right now is reaching a point in Dragonflight where there are too many heal over time effects within the talent tree, affecting both the tuning of the mastery as well as the space on the friendly unit frames. You have Efflorescence, you have Life Bloom, you can have double hots of rejuvenation, you can also have the regrowth hot, you can also have the Swiftmend hot, you can also have Adaptive Swarm, you can even have the Cenarion Ward heal over time, and that's 8 already. That's a lot. What they are also doing as a bigger change for Resto is the removal of Adaptive Swarm, to replace it with some more functionality around Heart of the Wild synergy, to remove an extra button from the Restoration Druid rotation. These are the main philosophies around the Druid, planned changes that they will then go on and apply to the specs and, balance them around all of these changes. For Monk, Blizzard had different priorities. They wanted to, for example, change all of the capstones at the bottom of the tree. They also wanted to add more utility, not that Monk lacked utility, but now they also have an Enraged spell available, as well as cutting down on the overall keybind requirements, which is quite a notorious problem for monks, especially something like Brewmaster Monk is quite overloaded with the amount of buttons they can have on their bars. They are doing this by adding choice nodes to most active options to offer a passive options or a change pathing to allow more skipping of all of these active spells, as well as reducing the amount of throughput in the general tree. This has often been a problem because, of course, most of your throughput, your damage or healing comes from your spec tree, so the one that is in the general tree is very valued because it's not there in many talents, so you want to pick them all up. So it becomes quite constraining trying to pick up all of the throughput talents in your general tree. So Blizzard is removing some of these, damage increase or healing increases through the tree to make it easier for you to path to other places rather than being forced to take these talents. The major change of Windwalker is to give the spec actual scaling. You might have heard multiple times the memes around Windwalker having no scaling or scaling terribly with secondary stats. This is what Blizzard is aiming at with these changes, focusing the power levels of haste and mastery stats, folding behind other options. You now have abilities like, for example, Fists of Fury now scaling with your haste, giving more value to the secondary stat, for example. Also, for everyone who disliked the playstyle, most of Touch of Death's gameplay is being replaced with a more execute-focused version through the core 3 instead of the AoE and repeat cast components of the spell, as well as Serenity being removed from the talent tree in the War Within, to be able to focus on the Windwalker Monk's cooldowns window around a more consistent window of time. But overall, giving Windwalker more scaling on their secondary stat is definitely the highlight of the planned changes for the spec. Mistweaver isn't receiving many changes. After all, the current state of Mistweaver is being enjoyed by quite a lot of players. The main change is that now they are getting their 2-class set Chi Harmony bonus, basically, as part of their talent tree, and then Essence Font is being removed. What they are doing with the removal of Essence Font is adding a couple of talents to give more value for their mastery stat to all of the Mistweavers who are focused on melee, in order to give more value to the fist-weaving style of Mistweaver for raid scenarios, as most of the raid healing right now of Mistweavers is not done playing as a Mistweaver spec, as that is currently the divide of the Mistweaver spec, either playing the more caster, Vivify, Enveloping Mist focused version, or playing the more fist weaving damage through healing version of the spec. The shortest one of the changes is the one to DK, as they haven't really gone on with actual details of the changes, just what is planned. They highlighted the goals for DK, reducing the amount of resource flooding that affects each spec to varying degrees, as well as reduce the throughput nodes towards the end of the tree, because it currently has 9 nodes that add a lot of tension and make it hard to flex into utility you would otherwise like to take. It's a similar problem we saw with something like Monk as well, having multiple throughput, damage increase, or healing increase talents in your general tree, for example, making it hard to go and choose other things, because how can you justify moving faster or having more avoidance if you have a talent that gives you 6% more damage? You always want to take that 6% more damage talent. That is something they want to address for DK as well. For Blood, they want to see where they can shift some of the abilities talents learned in the spec tree that would make more sense baseline, so that they can smooth out build diversity. That's the problem they think Blood has right now. They have to invest so heavily into the tree to basically be a functioning spec. They don't have a lot of varying build options for Blood. The main problem for Frost, as usual, it seems like every expansion that's what it is Ret of Sindragosa. Blizzard is trying to get it back to the more appropriate 30-second duration so that they can have more tuning knobs, similar to the example we made of the points that Blizzard can spend on the Druid spec being so limited by big cooldowns. Well, Frost is the perfect example of that. They have way too many points currently being spent on Breath of Sindragosa, which doesn't allow for much other room of balancing for the spec. That will be the plan in the War Within, to give Frost DK an actual viable alternative to play around instead of Breath of Sindragosa. When it comes to Unholy, they want to reduce the opener complexity. They want to make it more intuitive than it currently is. They feel like Gargoyle is an area they would like to explore to offer a new playstyle, to give Unholy DKs less plays that need to be spinned at the same time whenever they have to manage all of their cooldowns and line them up together for their big ramp and then big damage. But as mentioned, for now, this is only the vision for the changes. They haven't gone ahead to actually introduce any of the changes. They have introduced some for Paladin already. Holy Paladin is getting Light of the Martyr replaced. It's gonna no longer be an actual ability. It's gonna be a passive effect to keep the same thematic theme, but as a passive version to again reduce the number of buttons you press, which is, as we have now been seeing, a common theme across multiple visions for multiple specs. They are also smoothing out Blessing of Summer, now being a single blessing, working more or less the same way on every character you use it on. Similar to the other examples we made about the points you have to spend of power around your spec, Blizzard thinks that the beacon of the Paladin, has a very large amount of throughput assigned to it, so they would like to move some of that throughput, some of that budget of power points away from beacon. So TLDR, we are nerfing beacon to buff other abilities, and that's the general idea of Holy Paladin. One of the issues the devs had with Ret Paladin was the scaling. Ret Paladin has become OP recently, mostly because of buffs, flat damage increases, not really because the spec scaled well. In fact, one of their issues is that they have many abilities with guaranteed crit, or just very high chance to crit by default, which means your secondary stat of going for crit has a low value. So what they want to do in this next expansion is to change abilities to no longer automatically crit. Instead, they will now gain value when you crit, such as, for example, increasing the critical strike damage. But now, as a Ret Paladin, you will have more of a value going for crit as a secondary stat. Some of these effects are, for example, Art of War having its chance to proc increase when you critically hit, or things like Burn to Ash to increase the duration of Truth's Wake and make your other damage over time effects more powerful when you critically hit, for example. As well as one of the notorious sources of frustration for Ret is the division between AoE and single target. Ret has to lose a lot of AoE if they want to go for full single target, and vice versa, they have to lose a lot of single target if they want to go for full AoE. So Blizzard is trying to do some restructuring to alleviate some of this tension, to create more room to explore hybrid type builds for the spec. And that is all. It's not a bug, we're not missing Ret Paladin for now, there aren't really any major changes happening to Ret Paladin. Now, Evoker for now still has very minor changes. The major one they were going for was to reduce the threat generation of Devastation, as they acknowledged these problems for dev, and even worse, when we saw the hero talents, Devastation had even more options for even stronger burst damage, so that's what we're going for the first initial changes to Devastation, less threat generated. When it comes to Preservation, Blizzard is going to be introducing the Season 1 set bonus for Preservation, the very good quality of life instant cast Living Flame whenever it procs from Reversion Healing. It was a very good effect that made your spec flow very well, so now this is being added as a capstone at the bottom of the tree. That is the main change happening right now to Preservation as well, so not many focus changes or plans for the Evoker spec. The last class that has gotten its intentions for the next expansion planned out by Blizzard is Warrior. Blizzard comes right out of the gate saying that for the General Tree, their main goal is to increase build options and diversity, as well as to improve access to important Warrior utility. That's a pain point for Warrior, actually having good utility, making them wanted, for example, in Mythic Plus. They point out how now Berserker Rage is baseline, or how Shockwave is no longer at the bottom of the tree, but in a much more pickable position for everyone. So, more AoE stuns for warriors, and rearranged a lot of the other talents to make them more easy to pick. They point out this is something we have mentioned for pretty much every other spec with any resource that can become overflowing, that Rage is in a similar situation. They think that Rage generation for warriors of all specs was higher already than expected in Dragonflight, and they feel like warriors play best when Rage is a resource they must manage tactically. So they want to be able to distinguish between the 180 IQ warrior that can manage the rage and the zug brainless guy that keeps spamming execute. So as a result, of course, they are reducing or removing the rage generated by several talents and abilities, because they want you to be able to manage your rage more. This is then expanded spec by spec, same thing for Arms Warrior. They feel like they have a few too many talents about the abundance of rage for Arms Warrior without any really many reasons or ways to spend all of it, especially for Arms, whose rotation is most closely tied to the availability of rage to spend, due to their many talents synergizing with their spending of rage. They have normalized the rage cost for most Arms abilities, removed the increased rage cost for Barbaric Training, as well as the rage cost between similar abilities like Thunderclap or Whirlwind or Slam. Their goal for Arms is to have a choice in how much additional rage they want, and when, via passive talents like Blood Surge or active abilities like Skull Splitter, Bladestorm and Ravager. Blizzard also feels like Overpower is eating up too many buttons in the Arms rotation, because it's a one-size-fits-all type of abilities that you want to spam basically at any time, whether it's single target or AoE or whatnot. So instead, they are giving more options to Overpower, to the use of Overpower. Now, Tactician's chance to reset the cooldown of Overpower has been reduced at a maximum of 2% per rage spent. This, combined with the redesign of Storm of Swords, should reduce the frequency of Overpower resets to create more room in the Arms rotation to actually press other things other than Overpower. Blizzard is attempting also to limit the influence in your rotation of Colossus Smash, changing several of these talents that synergize with Colossus Smash, like Warrior's Torment, no longer triggering from Colossus Smash. The Recklessness buff provided will now increase Rage Regen by 25% instead of 100. And to provide more build options, they are offering an alternative to Test of Might. In for the Kills haste buff now lasts for the duration of the Colossus Smash effect itself, which will give synergy with Spiteful Serenity and Blunt Instruments. Their goal, again, is that players who do not want to play with Test of Might or Anger Management actually have a way to do so, as pretty much right now those are mandatory talents for Arms. One of the issues Blizzard had with Fury is that Fury's builds and rotation changed so much in Dragonflight that at certain points the rotation was excluding one or more abilities and talents from your rotation essentially altogether. Sometimes it was Raging Blow, sometimes it was Bloodthirst. They are attempting to fix both of them. They are trying to move away from this extreme rotation where one of the two gets basically completely ignored in favor of the other. They are removing Raging Armaments, improved Raging Blow and Cruelty have swapped position, and Wrath and Fury now increases, improving Raging Blow's chance to reset the cooldown of Raging Blow. Their point with this is to make Raging Blow a highly available rage generating ability, but not allow it to be used as the only ability in your rotation. Similar treatment given to Bloodthirst. They want to restore Bloodthirst to be a viable alternative while preventing it from becoming, the only ability you press in Fury's rotation over Raging Blow. Blizzard is giving up on Annihilator, which was an attempt to slow down the rotation of Fury, which failed as nobody plays with it. So instead, they remove it, they add Powerful Enrage. Now, instead of the improved Enrage talent is a choice node, now Powerful Enrage increases the damage dealt of your abilities by 15%. Which is a massive damage increase, but you get no more extra haste, no more faster playstyle. So the playstyle is slowed down in an attempt to give that avenue for Fury Warrior players who don't want to click buttons nearly as fast. And that's the last of the specs being mentioned in terms of the philosophy planned for the War Within. No Protection Warrior available for the moment at the very least. So for now, these are the thoughts and the ideas Blizzard has already announced for the specs in the War Within. There are of course going to be eventually all of the specs out, all of the plans Blizzard has for the specs in the next expansion, as well as of course the continued balancing that will go around these philosophies for each of these specs. We will see eventually how successful all of these ideas Blizzard has for each of these specs, how they will be in the next expansion. But for today, on this Friday, this is what we have. The recap on Blizzard's ideas and plans for these specs in the War Within. With this out of the way, we are now leaving each other. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, together with everyone who is supporting for free. Liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, are good examples. Now, with this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, tonight, we have decided, after much deliberating, that tonight we are going for Chinese.